Hello and welcome back to the Keepsake box series, which has been kindly sponsored by Axminster Tools. On this channel, the two most popular videos we've ever done have been focused around hinging, one of which was hinging a cabinet door, and the second of which was hinging the lid on the toolbox. Now with this project, because it requires more hinges, I want to use a slightly different style of hinge just to demonstrate another technique that's available, and to do that we're going to be using some very special hardware. However, that said, if you don't want to make the expense on this kind of stuff, by referring back to the Toolbox series, you'll not only see a really good method of installing the hinges, but you'll also see methods of cleaning them up to make them look like something as premium as this. But let's just talk about these for a moment. So these little hinges have been designed and made in the UK by a box maker called Andrew Crawford, who sells them under the brand name Smartware. In a previous box of this design, I ended up using his stop butt hinges, which turned out beautiful. But for these ones, it is going to require the use of a router table, which obviously kind of steps upon the limited tools aspect of this project. But again, the resources are there in the description below if you want to sort of do this in a slightly more approachable, user-friendly way. So these hinges obviously need to go here and here. However, we are going to have a problem with this in that on the outside edges next to the hinges, it's going to leave us with some short grain that is very likely to pop off when we run it through the router table. If, however, we had oriented the tails so that instead of going horizontally, they were going this way, these hinges would have been placed along long grain and we wouldn't have had that issue. The trade-off of that is that you wouldn't have seen the dovetail pitches on the front of the box because they would have been on the side like this. So this is the router table we'll be using to route in these hinges. It's the UJK cast iron router table, which in my opinion is the best router table you can get. I'm not just saying that because Axminster are the sponsor. I've had this for years. I've got a full unboxing and setup video on it. And in my opinion, if you want to get better than this, you're basically in spindle molder territory. It's so robust, all of the accessories that come with it are brilliant, and as long as you put a nice powerful router underneath, in my case a 1/2 inch DeWalt one, it's brilliant. By the way, this cabinet doesn't come with it as standard, I added that later. So to do this, I'm just going to be following Andrew's instructions, but fundamentally it comes down to just doing loads of testing. However, later on there are a few nuances to take note of because we will be reverse feeding this cutter, which is, if you're not prepared for it, could be dangerous. But we'll cover it all in this video. So to start with, we'll get the height of the cutter sorted. I did have a nice UJK 8mm one for this, but I broke it the other day, so I've just had to run out and get a fresh new one because this router bit needs to be sharp. So I fitted this router table with a nice router elevator. It's got a locking thingy here and your rise and fall just over here. So now we can do all of our adjustments from above the table, which makes things much easier. And we're just going to sort of eyeball this for the time being, and through a series of test cuts, we'll get it to the perfect depth. We'll go there to begin with, and then just lock it off, bring the fence in just slightly, and then pop this shroud over the top. So then we'll just get under here, set the router to maximum speed. And by the way, every time I'm making adjustments to the cutter and fence, the router is unplugged. And so I've just gone ahead and machined up 2 bits of MDF that we're going to use to test this height on, and I'll show you the process now. We're just going to take a small nibble or so out of both of these pieces of MDF and then see how the hinge fits in them. So there's a couple of things we can test here. Firstly, is the router bit the right width? Yes, it is. That fits absolutely beautifully. But obviously, more to the point, we're here to test the depth of it. When you test the depth of it, make sure to do so with the knuckle end of the hinge and not with the ends of the leaves, because as you can see, there is a very small gap at this end to give a bit of relief between the two leaves so that they don't scratch each other when they close. But as a result, the knuckle end of the hinge is slightly thicker. So if we just put that in there and then put the other one on top, you can see that we've still got a little bit to go. So we'll go ahead with a second pass and just hit these same slots again, but with the cutter ever so slightly higher. So when adjusting the height of this, just bear in mind, whatever that gap is, you want to raise the cutter half that amount because we're going to be doing it to both sides. The other thing to note with this is actually not better, but the lesser of two evils if you make these slots slightly too deep, because it's much easier to shim these hinges up with some sort of paper or something underneath than it is to try and hog out material to increase the depth like we would have if we'd have just gone ahead with this setting. So Aim for flush, ideally, but if it's just a hair below, you can always shim it up. Right, let's run them through again. And I have to say, I don't think we're going to get much perfect than that. That is just a lovely fit. Right, so with the height now established, next we can start figuring out the offset of the fence. Preferably your fence should have some sort of low friction, slick material on it. And this Axminster one comes with a lovely, I think it's melamine, it might be some sort of phenolic material, I don't quite know. But it's super slippery either way, and it's perfect for this. And I've also gone ahead and machined up a bunch of practice material that's the exact same thickness as the walnut sides on this box. So there is some algebra calculation you can do to figure out the distance of this fence, but to be honest, my algebra days stopped at secondary school. I much prefer just eyeballing things these days. So I'll just move this fence sort of to where I want it and lock it down. And on the back here, I do also have these micro adjusters, which might be useful later on. But if I'm completely honest, I'm a little bit of a psycho with this, and I do sometimes just tap it with a rubber face mallet on the back to get the adjustments I need. So let's get the shroud back in place. And I don't think I could quite use a feather board on this without it accidentally hitting the cutter, so I'm just going to use a push stick here to give me the side pressure I require. And I might also just slightly move in this fence here to give me a bit more support. On this table you can completely close them, but having a small gap does obviously allow for a bit of dust extraction. So just purely on a visual basis, we can see that this isn't centralized and some adjustment is going to be required. But obviously you could use a caliper as well to confirm this. But with this new information, we'll make the necessary fence adjustments and get it perfect. So it looks like I need to just come forward ever so slightly. So with that done, we've now got the height of the cutter sorted, we've got the offset of it sorted. The only thing now we need to get dialed in is the length. And to do this, we're going to set up a stop at a certain distance so that when we pass it through, the piece hits it and it stops us from going too far. But there's a couple of things to sort of note here. These stops that you can buy in addition to the UJK Router Table are great for all sorts of things, but there is just this tiny amount of deflection on them that for 99% of cases is fine. But when it comes to really, really fine detailed work where every micron matters, that tiny bit of deflection could be an issue for us. And so we're not going to use these, and in fact actually they won't even allow us to get close enough anyway in addition to this shroud. Instead I'll just clamp like a piece of material here or something, which will both allow us to get under that shroud and be far more secure when used with a clamp like this. And in terms of the placement of this stop, while we could do it with trial and error again, the instructions simply say to put a 34mm spacer between the cutter and this fence. So I've just shot this down to be 34mm exactly. But when we do this, we've just got to make sure that the cutter is sort of cutting at its extremes, I guess. So right about there is the furthest this blade will cut. And so that's going to be where we need to set this fence to. And I'm actually going to lift the fence up ever so slightly because this clamp is really nice and secure, and having that small gap underneath will stop any dust and things bunching up in there and create some inaccuracies. So yeah, that's looking to be pretty good there. That should be us all ready to go. So we'll just get this shroud back in position again. I'll have to remove it when I do the lower part of the box, but it's always good to have it where you can. But we'll just do one final test on the MDF just to make sure that length and, well, everything by this point is set correctly before doing it on the box. Oh, there you go, look at that, stops right in the middle of the pivot there. So I'm happy that that's all the testing complete and we can go ahead and start routing this into the box. The last thing to do is just make sure you cut them in the right place. I'll just do this by sort of roughly scribbling the location of the hinges on the bottom of the lid. And we'll just check we've got the correct sort of grain flow and everything. So yeah, hinges are there. The other leaves will be here and here. You can't screw this up, Matt. Now, when doing this, we're only going to be able to do one side of the lid at a time. We can't reach the other side because the stop is going to need to be on this side. And so once we've gone ahead and done the first cut on the lid and on the box itself, we'll then set up this block, but to be on the other side using that exact same shim thingy, and yeah, just go from the other way. But I'll tell you more about that in a minute because you've just got to be a bit more careful with that. So everything is adequately locked down. Let's do this. Right, so that's the first two slots done and they are looking beautiful. Before moving on to the next one, let's just talk a little bit about router physics, I guess. So this cutter is currently spinning counterclockwise, and just conveniently it's the same direction as this arrow here. So it's spinning in towards the fence like this. This means that if we feed material from right to left, the cutter is actually pushing the material into the fence and keeping it nice and secure. And so generally this is why you're going to work from right to left with a router table. The only exception would be, and I can't think of any reason why you would do this, but who knows, maybe you're feeding something between the fence and the cutter. The bit is now spinning away from you and feeding it through from this direction is just going to cause it to accelerate. So in that case, you're going to work from the other side. But again, you should never really need to do that. You should always be working on the front or this side of the cutter, never really the back. But that said, this is why feeding from this other direction is now going to be somewhat precarious, because as this cutter comes round, it's now going to be cutting away from the fence, and whatever you're pushing through it from this direction is going to want to deflect away. So when we're pushing in from left to right, we just want to make sure we've got really firm pressure pushing it into the fence, because it is going to be working against you. I love that. Just friction alone is all that you need. So cool. Right, there we go. Back at the workbench. That task never gets less scary. So now we're going to start doing the screws and getting these hinges fixed in place. So we'll first just get rid of any like little frilly bits that have been left over from routing. This is just some 2000 grit random orbit pads that I'm using to do so, because it's not really coarse enough to round the corners of these hinge mortises that much. And actually, while I'm here, these hinges normally get supplied with a high gloss finish on them, but I've had them sat around for a fair while now. I've been fiddling around with them and there was a few spots of tarnishing on them as a result. So before filming this video, I just went across and put them back to a satin shine with this stuff, and I actually prefer the look of that anyway. But yeah, just so you're aware, they're normally high gloss. So on these hinges, within the pivot mechanism, you've got these two outer things, and then a middle section on it that actually sort of is the bit that falls and has the built-in stop mechanism. And when installing these in the box, the leaf with the two things sticking out of it is the bit that needs to be attached to the box itself, and this one with the single pivot mechanism in the middle is the bit that gets attached to the lid. This means that when the box goes together and you look at it from above, you're presented with this nice rounded look rather than see the underside of it where the stop mechanism is found. So when installing these, we're going to mark these screw locations with this awl, and when you mark these holes, instead of sort of marking true center in those holes, just make it ever so biased to the front of the hole, closer to the mass of the box. You want this to be ever so slight, like barely noticeable, because what this will do is stop your hinge from being pulled out like this due to it being a little bit too close to the back, because the countersink on the underside of the screw will make it do that. Whereas having it closer to the front will have the opposite effect and actually pull it in tighter and close up this gap at the front. But again, really small amount. We're going to be using very fragile brass screws for this, and any excess force on them will cause the heads to strip. Right, so now we can just go ahead and drill this out. For this, I'm using a number 3 by 3/8 inch screw, and I've already gone ahead and tested the size of the drill bit on a scrap piece of wood to ensure that the screw bites in a nice way. And this is an interesting tip I just read in the instructions. On the top of the screw where you haven't got a thread, you can actually just pop your awl into the hole and just slightly widen it at that top area, because that's going to help sort of reduce your chances of the screw stripping. And I'll come back later and sort of tidy these screws up and probably even replace them. These ones are just sort of going to be here to test the fit and to tap the wood in preparation for the final screws that I put in. And also a bit of candle wax on these screws can also be a nice thing that helps get them seated. Right, let's get this lid in situ now. So I just want to check everything does line up nicely. Right, and there you go. That's how you install smart hinges using a router table. This is a brilliant product, and it is a perfect way to finish off a high quality box like this. So I'll put a link below to Andrew's website. He also sells a bunch of other things like locks and obviously the butt hinges that have the stop mechanism as well. But yeah, it's all really good stuff, and I'll be doing a cleanup of it all prior to final assembly to get it back to its sort of original shine. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful. Links to everything that is relevant is in the description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.